Welcome to this Easter journey. As you listen to the audio, feel free to stop, to ponder, to pause where you like. If you are doing this in the Glen, as we are now, we will give you instructions of where you might like to stop on the way and listen, and then instructions to move on as well. As we begin to enter the Glen, if you are here, then please find a place to stop under the cherry trees and listen to the first part of the journey.
Our journey begins after Jesus has spent the last 3 years teaching and healing, performing miracles, and revealing to all the people what God's world could really be like. We join this journey at the point where Judas, one of Jesus' closest friends, decides to betray him. The time for Passover was drawing near. Tensions had been rising amongst the high priests and religious leaders. Jesus was becoming a problem, and they needed to do something about him. But the people loved him, and a direct attack on him would not go down well, could even lead to a riot. So they had to be clever and find a way of ending this whilst keeping public favour. That's when Judas appeared. He was one of Jesus' disciples, one of the 12 who were his closest followers. Leaving the rest of the group, Judas snuck off and met with the high priests and temple guards and began to talk to them about how he might betray Jesus and hand him over to them. The high priests couldn't believe their luck. Here was the answer they'd been looking for. So they agreed to pay him well, and Judas started to find a way to betray Jesus, out of sight of the crowd. Stay here for a moment before you move on to the next part of the journey. Consider what it might have been like for Judas. What might have prompted him to join with the high priests like this?
Now, when you're ready, walk just across the path to the burn where we will have the next part of the Easter journey.
Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Jesus knew his time was coming. He looked around at the room where they were meeting, just him and his closest followers. Then he got up and set aside the robe he was wearing. He bent down and picked up a servant's apron and wrapped it round his waist. Then he went over to a small table in the corner of the room, picked up a jug, and poured water into the basin that was sitting there. Slowly he walked over to his friends, knelt down before them, and one by one picked up their worn and dirty feet and began to wash them, drying them with his apron. There was a hushed silence as the men stared at him. When he arrived at Simon Peter, Peter said, "Master, you can't wash my feet." Jesus replied,
You do not understand what I'm doing, but it will make sense in time.
Peter persisted indignantly, "You're not going to wash my feet. Never!" Jesus answered him gently,
If I don't wash you, you can't be part of what I'm doing.
Then Peter exclaimed, "Well, if that's the case, then wash all of me." Jesus laughed and said,
If you've had a bath in the morning, then you just need your feet washed now. You are clean.
He went on, and then looking round the room sadly and lowering his eyes,
Though not every one of you.
Judas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then Jesus got up, put the basin and apron back where he got them, put on his robe, and returned to his place at the table. Then he said,
You do not know what I've done for you this evening. You call me teacher and Lord, and that is who I am. But just as I, your teacher, your Lord, have washed your feet, so you must wash one another's feet. Understand this, and you will live a blessed life.
So what is your impression of Jesus in this scene? What might it be like to have Jesus wash your feet? And what does Jesus' challenge to wash one another's feet mean for you today?
When you're ready, start to move towards the entrance of the sunken garden. You might like to find somewhere to sit for the next part of the journey.
Jesus shares a final supper. The friends continued eating together and sharing the Passover meal. They chatted happily amongst themselves. Then Jesus spoke to them once more.
I've really been looking forward to this meal.
He began.
It will be the last one we eat together before we eat together in the kingdom of God.
The disciples glanced at each other with looks of mild confusion and concern. Then Jesus picked up the cup that was in front of him, gave thanks to God for it, and said,
Take this and pass it round. As for me, I will not drink wine again until the kingdom of God arrives.
Then, picking up the bread, he gave thanks to God once more, tore it, and started to pass it around.
This is my body, broken for you.
He said,
Eat this and remember me.
Later, as the meal was almost finished, Jesus picked up the cup once more, and just like he had with the bread, he said,
This cup is the new covenant made possible through me. my life being poured out for you.
Again, the disciples looked round one another. The atmosphere in the room was changing. A heaviness descended.
Do you know that the one who will betray me is here at the table?
Jesus said. Anxious murmurs erupted round the table as the disciples began accusing one another. Who would do this? What do you notice about this scene? How does Jesus seem to you?
Now start to enter the sunken garden for the next part of the journey.
Jesus prays. The time came for them to leave the room where they had been meeting, and the party headed out to the Mount of Olives. When they arrived, Jesus turned to them and said,
Pray that you don't give in to temptation.
Then he separated from the group to a quiet spot and knelt down and prayed.
Father,
He cried.
remove this cup from me.
Then quietly, head bowed low, he said,
But not my will, but yours.
At once, an angel was at his side, strengthening him. He kept on praying earnestly, the sweat pouring off him. When he was done, he got up from his prayer and returned to the group, where he found his friends sleeping. Imagine sitting with Jesus as he prays. What do you notice?
Now, if you'd like to leave the sunken garden, head over towards the bridge for the next part of the journey.
Jesus is arrested. Suddenly, a crowd appeared and surrounded them. Leading the pack was Judas. On reaching Jesus, Judas stepped forward and kissed him. Jesus looked at him and said,
Judas, you would betray the Son of Man with a kiss?
The other disciples started to close in on him. Master, shall we fight? They asked. There was a scuffle, and one of them took a swing at the chief priest's servant and cut off his right ear. Then Jesus said,
Let them be, even in this.
Then he reached out and gently touched the servant's ear, and he was healed. Then Jesus turned and spoke to the high priests, the religious leaders, and temple guards.
What is this, that you've come at me with swords and clubs? Every day I've been with you in the temple, and you've not so much as lifted a hand against me. But so be it. Do it your way. This is a dark night and a dark hour.
And with that they seized him and led him away to the house of the high priest. Watch as Jesus is led away by the crowd. As you walk to the next part of the journey, walk silently and become aware of this dark night and this dark hour.
Now we'd like to continue up the main path into the glen. You might like to stop here in the clearing for the next part of the journey.
Jesus is put on trial. When it was morning, the religious leaders brought Jesus before their high council to question him. Are you the Messiah? They asked.
If I said yes,
Said Jesus,
you wouldn't believe me. If I asked you what you meant by that question, you wouldn't answer me. So all I can say is from here on, the Son of Man takes his place at God's right hand.
Ha! They retorted. So you admit your claim to be the Son of God?
So you say.
Replied Jesus. But they'd had enough, and their minds were already made up. Why do we need any more evidence? We've all heard him as good as say it himself. So they grabbed Jesus and took him to Pilate. We found this man undermining our law and order, forbidding taxes to be paid to Caesar, and setting himself up as Messiah King, they said. Pilate turned to Jesus and said, Is this true? Are you King of the Jews?
Those are your words, not mine.
Replied Jesus. I find nothing wrong here, said Pilate to the high priests. He seems harmless enough to me. He's stirring up unrest among the people, first in Galilee and now here, the high priest persisted. "He," they said, pointing at Jesus, "he is a dangerous man." When Pilate heard that Jesus was a Galilean, he realized that it was not his decision to make anyway. So he sent him to Herod, as he happened to be in Jerusalem for a few days. Herod was delighted to see Jesus, as he had wanted to see him for a long time. He was hoping to see some miracles, but despite his constant questions, Jesus remained silent. Herod did not like this and took offense. He turned on Jesus and started mocking him, dressing him up in an elaborate king costume. Then he sent him back to Pilate. Pilate called together the high priests and rulers and said to them, "You brought this man to me as a disturber of the peace. I examined him in front of you and found nothing wrong. Neither did Herod. It is clear that he has done nothing wrong, so I'm going to give him a warning and then let him go." But on hearing this, the crowd went wild. "Kill him!" they shouted. "Kill him and give us Barabbas!" Barabbas was imprisoned for starting a riot in the city and for murder. Pilate was not convinced, but the crowd kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" "But what for?" asked Pilate. "I have found nothing in him that deserves death." But the crowd kept shouting, demanding he be crucified. And finally, Pilate gave in. He released Barabbas and handed Jesus over to them. Watch as Jesus is led away again and handed over to those who will crucify him. Notice how Jesus is. The atmosphere. Watch the faces of those who love him as he's taken away from them. Feel what it might have been like.
Continue to walk up the glen slowly as you listen to the next part of the journey.
Jesus is led away. They led Jesus off, and he began the long walk to Golgotha. They made Simon, a man from Cyrene, who happened to be coming in from the countryside, carry the cross behind Jesus. A huge crowd of people followed, women weeping in his wake.
Keep walking until you are approaching the top of the glen, and stop when you see a cross just above you on the hillside.
Jesus is crucified. When they got to Golgotha, Skull Hill, they crucified him along with two criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. As Jesus hung there, he prayed,
Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing.
Some of the soldiers below him divided up his clothes and threw dice to see who would get them. The people stood staring at him. The religious leaders taunted him, saying, "He saved others. Let's see him save himself. The Messiah of God? Ha!" Then the soldiers came up and laughed at him, toasting him like he was a king and saying, "So you're king of the Jews? Save yourself then." They put a sign over him saying, "This is the King of the Jews." By now, it was noon. Suddenly, the whole earth became dark, and darkness covered the earth for 3 hours. The curtain in the temple that separated the people from God tore right down the middle. Then Jesus cried out in a loud cry,
Father, I place my life in your hands.
Then he breathed his last. Stay in this place, and if you can look at Jesus on the cross, remain in this place of darkness and listen as Jesus breathes his last.
When you're ready, continue to the top of the glen and over the bridge, and stop when you see a small cave carved out of the rock.
Jesus is buried. After a while, the crowd began to disperse. Those who knew Jesus well hung on. There was a man called Joseph, a member of the Jewish High Council, a good man who had not agreed to the actions of the council. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Taking him down from the cross, he wrapped him in linen bandages and placed him in a tomb cut out into the rock. The women who had been Jesus' companions from Galilee followed along. They saw where Jesus was placed, and they went back to prepare burial spices and perfumes. As it was the day before the Sabbath, they waited until the next day before returning. Watch as Jesus is laid in the tomb. Watch as the stone is rolled across. Notice the faces of the women as they watch and leave. Allow yourself space to mourn with them.
Now continue down the glen, taking your time, and stop when you come to the final bridge.
He is risen. As soon as it was morning and the Sabbath had ended, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. But when she arrived, she saw that the stone had been moved away from the entrance. She was alarmed and ran to get Simon Peter and John. "They took the Master from the tomb," she exclaimed. "We don't know where they've put him." Peter and John ran to the tomb and saw that it was true. John stooped down to look inside the tomb and saw that the linen cloth was there. Peter then pushed past and went inside and saw the linen bandages lying there at the bottom and the linen used to cover Jesus' head neatly folded and set at the top. Astonished, they went back home. But Mary stayed there, tears rolling down her cheeks. As she wept, she knelt down to look into the tomb and saw two angels sitting there, one at the head and the other at the foot of where Jesus' body had been laid. "Woman, why do you weep?" they asked her. "They took my Master," she said, "and I don't know where they put him." Then she turned away and saw a man standing there. He spoke to her.
Woman, why do you weep? Who are you looking for?
"Sir," she answered, thinking it must be the gardener. "Sir, if you took him, tell me where you put him so I can care for him."
Mary.
Jesus said. And turning to face him, she said in Hebrew, "Rabboni," meaning teacher. Jesus said,
Don't halt me just now, for I have not yet gone up to the Father. Go to my friends and tell them, I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God.
And Mary Magdalene went, telling the disciples everything. So stay here with Jesus, the risen Christ. Like Mary, turn and face him. What do you want to say or do?
Now, when you're ready, head on back to the cherry trees just down here where you began. What stands out to you most from this journey? Which parts of it do you remember most vividly? How do you feel about Jesus as you've been through this journey? Is there anything that you would like to say to Jesus? The Easter story reminds us that we are never without hope, that Jesus' life, his death, and his miraculous resurrection are as powerful today as they were 2,000 years ago. Jesus says that if we choose to stick with him, to listen to him, we will experience truth, and the truth will set us free. We hope this will be your experience this Easter.